How is the king, really? It sounds like such a simple question, and yet for more than 2 years now, it is the one question the most powerful family in Britain has never truly been willing to answer. Think about that for a moment. We have been told he is doing well. We have been told he is in good spirits. Only days ago, his own son stood before cameras in New York and told the world the king is doing great. 3 reassuring words. And yet the treatment has never stopped. The nature of his illness has never once been named. And quietly, almost without anyone noticing, the duties that for a lifetime belonged to Charles have begun to slip, one by one, into the hands of his son. I'm Edmund Hale, and today I want to ask you the question the palace would prefer you never asked out loud. If everything is truly fine, then why is Prince William suddenly carrying the weight of a king? Because here is what nobody at the palace will confirm, and nobody can quite explain. In the space of a single year, William has stepped into roles no one expected him to hold this soon. And every time the king steps back, the palace offers the same calm reassurance and the same total silence about what is really happening behind those walls. So stay with me, because over the next half hour, I am going to walk you through everything, from the very first day the word cancer entered the palace, through the moment an estranged son dropped everything to fly home, through a scandal that exposed just how far this family will go to control a story, all the way to the quiet handover that is happening in front of our eyes right now. And by the end, you will be able to answer that question for yourself. If these are the stories you want the truth about, subscribe now, because this one is only going to matter more in the months ahead. Let me be clear about what is actually at stake here, because it is far bigger than one man's health. A monarch is not simply a person. A monarch is an institution, a living symbol that 1,000 years of history lean upon. When a king's health becomes uncertain, it is not only a family that holds its breath, it is a nation, it is a line of succession, it is the delicate machinery of a crown that must at all costs appear stable, even when it is anything but. And that is exactly why what we are watching is so extraordinary. Because the British monarchy has one golden rule above all others. Never explain, never complain. Control the story and reveal nothing. So when that same institution begins quietly moving a king's responsibilities onto the shoulders of the next in line, while insisting nothing is wrong, you have to ask yourself a simple question. Which part of that are we actually supposed to believe? To understand why this matters so much right now, we have to go back to the beginning, to the moment the words "the king" and "cancer" were spoken in the same breath for the very first time. It was February of 2024, and it began, strangely enough, with something entirely different. Charles had gone into hospital for a routine correctable condition, a benign enlargement of the prostate, a minor procedure, nothing that should have frightened anyone. He even encouraged other men to get themselves checked, and for a moment it looked like nothing more than an ordinary story about an aging man taking care of himself. But during that treatment, doctors found something they had not been looking for. And within days, Buckingham Palace did something it almost never does. It confirmed, publicly, that the king had been diagnosed with a form of cancer. Now notice the wording there, a form of cancer. Not which form, not where, not what stage. From the very first sentence, the palace drew a line it has never once crossed in the years since. It would tell us that the king was ill, but it would never, ever tell us with what. It said only that the cancer had been caught during that unrelated procedure, and that he would begin treatment at once. And I want you to sit with that, because it may be the single most important detail in this entire story. In an age when we know almost everything about the people in power, their fortunes, their feuds, their private messages, The exact nature of the British King's illness has remained a total, deliberate secret. Why do you think that is? What kind of news is so sensitive that, even now, after all this time, it still cannot be spoken aloud? The country reacted the way countries do at such moments, with a strange, quiet shock. This was not some distant, elderly relative. This was the king, the man on the coins, the man on the stamps, the figure so permanent that most people alive have never known the throne without him or his mother upon it. Get well messages poured in from around the world, and, for a few days, the endless noise of royal gossip fell silent, replaced by something simpler and more human: concern. But the most telling reaction of all did not come from a crowd or a headline. It came from an aeroplane, because within hours of the announcement, one man on the other side of the world dropped everything and flew home. Prince Harry, the son who had left, the son who had aired the family's secrets to the world, the son the palace had spent years at war with, boarded a flight from California the moment he heard. And here is the part that should stay with you. That reunion, after everything, after the interviews and the memoir and the lawsuits, lasted barely half an hour. 30 minutes with a father he had barely spoken to in years, and then he was gone again, back across the ocean. Ask yourself, what does it take to make a man cross the world for 30 minutes? What does a son sense in a moment like that that makes even years of bitterness suddenly weigh nothing at all? That single flight told us more about the seriousness of the news than any careful palace statement ever could. When the diagnosis was announced, Charles stepped back from all public-facing duties. Not from being king, because a monarch never stops being monarch, but from the handshakes, the walkabouts, the public appearances that are the visible face of the crown. Behind the scenes, he kept signing the state papers, the famous red boxes that follow a sovereign everywhere. But the public Charles, the one we see, simply vanished from view. And into that gap stepped a mechanism most people have never even heard of: the Councillors of State. A Councillor of State is a senior member of the royal family who is legally permitted to carry out certain official functions of the monarch when he is unable to. It is the constitutional safety net, the plan for the moment a king cannot act. And here is a detail almost everyone missed. Just over a year before Charles fell ill, in late 2022, the law around those councillors was quietly changed to widen the pool of people who could step in. At the time, it looked like dry, technical housekeeping. In hindsight, it looks like a family quietly making sure the machine could keep running if the worst ever came. And at the very top of that list of names stands one man, Prince William. Did you catch that? The instant the king could not appear, the Constitution already had its answer ready, and that answer was his son. For a few months in 2024, the reassurances came steadily. He was responding well. He was in good spirits. He was seen occasionally in a photograph smiling. And by the end of April, he staged his return, and I use that word deliberately, staged, because his first public engagement back was a visit to a cancer treatment center. Think about the message in that. A man recovering from cancer, returning to public life by walking into a cancer hospital in front of the cameras. Nothing about this family is ever an accident. Every image is chosen. Every backdrop is a sentence. And that sentence read, "I am a survivor. I am back. Do not worry." But a carefully chosen image is not the same thing as the truth, is it? And I want to be fair to the king here. It is entirely possible that Charles has responded well, and is genuinely far better than the silence makes us fear. But here is the problem with a palace that tells you nothing. When you refuse to give people the truth, you leave them with nothing to hold on to but their fears, and nature abhors a vacuum. Every unanswered question becomes a rumor. Every silence becomes a suspicion. And in 2024, this family learned that lesson the hard way. Not through the king at all, but through the woman standing beside his heir. Block 2. Because Charles was not the only one. 2024 was for this family a year that felt almost cursed. In the very same season the king fell ill, the Princess of Wales, Catherine, disappeared from public view after major abdominal surgery. And what happened next is the single clearest proof I can give you of how this palace handles the truth, and why you should never take its reassurances at face value. For weeks, Catherine was simply not seen, and into that silence the internet went to war with itself. Where is Kate? The question became a global obsession. Wild theories spread by the hour, some cruel, some absurd, all of them growing in the empty space the palace refused to fill. And then, trying to calm the storm, the palace released a photograph. A happy family picture, released on Mother's Day, meant to prove that all was well. It did the opposite. Because within hours, the world's major photo agencies did something they almost never do to a royal image. They pulled it. They retracted it. They warned news outlets not to use it, because the photograph had been digitally altered, manipulated. The one image the palace released to end the speculation had been edited, and it was caught. Catherine herself had to put out a statement apologizing for the confusion. Let that sink in. The most media-savvy institution on earth was caught handing the public a doctored picture, and it turned a health rumor into an international credibility crisis. Why am I telling you this in a video about the king? Because it is the perfect illustration of the pattern. When this palace decides to control a story rather than tell it, things do not go quietly. The silence breeds suspicion, the suspicion breeds chaos, and the clumsy attempts to manage it only make everything worse. So when they tell you, calmly, that the king is doing great, and they show you a carefully chosen photograph to prove it, remember the Mother's Day picture. Remember how confidently they can present something that is not quite what it seems. Catherine, thankfully, would soon after reveal the truth herself, that she had been diagnosed with cancer and had begun a course of preventative treatment. Later, she would share the genuinely joyful news that she had finished that treatment and was in remission. And notice once again the contrast. When the princess was ready, she spoke plainly. She named the illness, she named the recovery. She looked into a camera and told her own story in her own words. So ask yourself, why, in the king's case, has that same plainness never once arrived? Why is his the one story of all of them that stays locked behind a wall of soft, careful, meaningless words? Why can the future queen tell us the truth, but the reigning king cannot? This is not new, by the way. The British Crown has always guarded the health of its monarchs like a state secret, because a sick king has always meant a vulnerable throne. When King George VI, the present king's own grandfather, was dying of lung cancer in the early 1950s, he was never even told the full truth of his condition, and neither was the public. He died in his sleep, and the nation woke to a young Queen Elizabeth. In Elizabeth's own final months, 70 years later, the public was told only of episodic mobility problems, gentle language that revealed almost nothing, right up until the day she was gone. The palace has centuries of practice in saying just enough to reassure, and never enough to inform. So when they tell you the king is doing great, remember this is an institution that has perfected the art of the comforting half-truth across generations. Then, at the very end of 2025, came the next piece of the puzzle. Reports emerged that the king's treatment was moving into what was described as a precautionary, managed phase. That going into 2026, his treatment schedule would be reduced. On the surface, that sounds like good news, does it not? Reduced treatment, a step in the right direction, something to celebrate. But stay with me and ask the harder question. If a man has truly recovered, if he is, as we keep being told, doing great, then why is he still being treated at all, 2 years on? Why does the treatment continue, quietly, in the background of every reassuring photograph? Reduced is not finished. Managed is not cured. And precautionary is one of those careful palace words that can mean almost anything you want it to mean. It is a word designed to sound like progress, while promising absolutely nothing. Because that is the thread that runs underneath every reassuring headline, and it is the thread I want to follow with you now. Not what the palace says, what the palace does, and what the palace has quietly, steadily, unmistakably been doing is handing more and more of a king's life to his son. The words say nothing has changed. The actions say everything has. So let us look at those actions, one by one, and let you decide which of the two is telling the truth. So let us talk about William. Because if you want to understand the true state of a monarchy, you do not listen to what it announces, you watch where the work goes. And over the past 2 years, the work has been going, steadily and unmistakably, in one direction. Consider what the role of the Prince of Wales was always meant to be. For decades, the heir waits, he supports, he shadows the monarch, learning, preparing, standing one respectful step behind. That is the role Charles himself played for more than half a century. Do not forget that. Charles waited 70 years to become king, the longest apprenticeship in the history of the British throne. 70 years of standing behind his mother, preparing for a job that never seemed to arrive. And when it finally did, when he at last placed the crown on his own head at the age of 73, he had barely worn it for a year before that word, cancer, changed everything. There is a cruelty in that timing that is almost hard to look at. A lifetime of waiting for this. Now watch what has happened to his heir. Since the diagnosis, the future has stopped feeling far away for William. He has taken on more engagements, more responsibility, a larger share of the visible monarchy than any Prince of Wales in living memory has carried while the king still reigned. He has stepped in to represent the crown at moments his father could not. He has quietly absorbed patronages, duties, and appearances that once flowed automatically to Charles. He has carried on building his own platform, his environmental prize, his work on homelessness, the projects meant to define his own future reign, while simultaneously shouldering more and more of his father's present one. Piece by piece, the shape of a reign that has not yet begun has started to appear. And he has not carried it alone. Queen Camilla, so often the most criticized figure in this family, quietly became one of its hardest workers through the king's illness, stepping up, filling gaps, keeping the visible monarchy moving while her husband was treated behind closed doors. Whatever you think of her, ask yourself what it means that the two people now holding this institution upright, day to day, are increasingly the wife and the son, while the king himself appears in carefully rationed glimpses. That is not how a monarchy looks when its monarch is simply fine. That is how a monarchy looks when it is being carried. And here is the part that should make you lean in. Every single time, the palace frames it as normal, a modernizing monarchy, a natural sharing of the load, a slimmed-down crown for a modern age. Nothing to see here. But ask yourself, honestly, does it feel normal? Does a healthy king, secure in his recovery, quietly transfer the heart of his role to his heir? Or is this what it looks like when an institution is preparing, very carefully and very silently, for something it does not dare to say out loud. Now let me be fair, because fairness is the only thing that separates the truth from the rumor mill. There is an innocent explanation for all of this. A king who has been through a serious health scare, and who is himself in his mid-70s, might sensibly choose to lighten his load, to protect his recovery, to lean on a capable son and a hard-working wife. That is not sinister, that is wise. A reasonable man might do exactly that and live for many more years in good health, easing gradually into a quieter role. I am not here to bury the king. I am here to ask why, if the explanation is so innocent, the palace works so very hard to make sure we never see the full picture. And there is one more thing you should know, because it closes off the easiest escape route from all of this. Charles will not abdicate. He has made that clear in the way this family always makes such things clear, quietly but unmistakably. Like his mother before him, he sees the crown as a duty for life, a vow taken before God, not a job to be resigned from when it becomes hard. And that single fact is what makes this whole story so heavy, because it means there is only one way this reign ends. Not with a graceful retirement, not with a handover of convenience, which means every duty that passes to William now passes not as a temporary favor, but as a rehearsal, a slow, quiet rehearsal for a day no one is allowed to mention. Because the pattern is what unsettles people. It is not any single event. It is the direction of all of them together. The treatment that never quite ends. The illness that is never quite named. The son who is never quite off duty. The wife who never quite stops covering. And the reassurances that never quite reassure. Line them up, one beside the other, and a question forms that no palace statement has been able to silence. Is the crown, quietly, already beginning to change hands? And then, into all of this, came a single sentence that set the whole thing alight. In New York, at a glittering gala, Prince Harry, the son who left, the son who lives an ocean away, was asked about his father. And he said the king was doing great. Now, think about how strange that moment truly is. For the most reliable, most human update on the health of the British monarch in months, the world did not turn to Buckingham Palace. It turned to the son who is barely on speaking terms with it, catching a few words in passing at a party. What does it tell you? That the palace itself will not give a straight answer, but a rare, unguarded remark from an estranged son travels around the planet in hours. It tells you how starved people are for the truth. It tells you how large the silence has grown, that 3 casual words could feel like breaking news. And it tells you something else, something quieter and sadder, that even now, even from across an ocean, even through all the pain of this broken family, a son is still watching his father's health from a distance, and still hoping. The same son who once flew home for 30 minutes is still, 2 years later, being asked by strangers how his father is, because no one else will say. Because underneath the constitutional drama, underneath the succession and the statements and the strategy, there is a father and his sons. There is a man who waited a lifetime for a crown and may not get to wear it as long as he dreamed. There is one son being prepared, faster than anyone wanted, to take his place, carrying a weight that was supposed to arrive far later in his life. And there is another son, far away, estranged and aching, reduced to learning how his father is from a microphone at a gala. If that does not move you, I do not know what will. So where does that leave us? Let me tell you what we actually know, stripped of all the spin. We know the king was diagnosed with a form of cancer, and we do not know which. We know it was found by accident, during treatment for something else. We know his treatment has continued, quietly, into a reduced phase, and we do not know why it continues if he is well. We know that his son has taken on more of the monarchy than any heir in recent memory, and that his wife has quietly done the same, and we are told this means nothing. We know this family will not and cannot tell a straight story about a health matter, because we watched them get caught doing exactly that with a doctored photograph. And we know that the clearest word on the king's health in months came not from his own palace, but from the son who left. Put those facts side by side, and then ask yourself the only question that matters. Does the picture the palace is painting actually match the picture the palace is living? Here is what I believe, after a lifetime spent watching this family from the outside. I do not believe the king is at death's door. I want to say that plainly, because fear is not the same as fact, and I will not pretend to know what I cannot. But I also do not believe for one moment that everything is as simple and as settled as we are being told. Something has shifted. A reign is being quietly reinforced from beneath. A son is being moved into place. A wife is holding the line. And an institution that survives on the appearance of permanence is doing the one thing it only ever does when it is worried. It is preparing. And that is the real story here. Not a death, not a scandal. Something subtler, and in its way, more human. A family and a country living through the slow, unspoken understanding that an era is entering its final chapters, while everyone involved is required to smile and insist that nothing has changed at all. The crown does not like to admit that its kings are mortal, but its kings always are. George VI was, Elizabeth was, and Charles, the man who waited longer than any of them to reign, knows it better than anyone. The quiet handover we are watching, whether it takes 1 year or 10, is the surest sign of all that everyone behind those walls already understands what the walls will never say. So the next time a palace spokesman tells you the king is doing great, I want you to do something. I want you to stop listening to the words and start watching the hands. Watch where the duties go. Watch who stands at the center of the family photographs and who is quietly moved to the edge. Watch how often and how quietly the future steps forward, while the present steps back. Because in this family, the truth has never lived in what they say. It has always lived in what they do. If this story made you see the headlines a little differently, then subscribe and turn on the bell, because I will be following every step of this quiet transition as it unfolds, and there will be more to tell. Tell me in the comments what you believe. Is the palace simply protecting a private man's dignity, or is it hiding just how close the next reign really is? And when you are ready for the next piece of this puzzle, I will take you inside the fractured relationship between the two brothers, who will ultimately decide this monarchy's future. It is waiting for you right here. I'm Edmund Hale. The crown weighs heavy, but the truth weighs more. I will see you there.